Hello, welcome to another edition of the Pace Report. I'm Brian Pace reporting live here in New York City. This year's 2013 APAP Music and Performance Conference showcased endless artists ranging from people in the theater arts as well as jazz performers. And this year I had a wonderful opportunity to break bread and see Will Calhoun, one of the co-founders and the drummer of Living Color. In fact, he has a brand new record that's about to be released on Motema Records, which features some great jazz luminaries ranging from Ron Carter, Wallace Roney, and Donald Harrison. This brother's musical journey stems from the boogie down Bronx, and his latest CD is a reflection of where he is musically. We sat down and talked about the concept of this brand new CD. We talked about his origins growing up in the boogie down Bronx. Also, we sat down and talked about why it's very important that he continues to reach out to the elders to help him not only just learn more about the music, but pass it on to next generations of younger musicians. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the sounds of Will Calhoun live at Zinc Bar here in New York City as part of this year's 2013 APAP Music and Theater Performance Conference here in New York City. Man, I am very proud of you, man. I mean, I have followed you throughout your career, and off and on, we have sat down and broke bread. But this CD is really kind of an amalgamation of your love for the tradition of jazz music.
First of all, I want to say thank you very much for that. It's a pleasure to be here, and yes, it is. I am a fan. I grew up playing and studying this music in this city, in New York City. I studied with Horace Arnold, and Horace introduced me to R. Blakey, and Max Roach, and Elvin Jones, and it's an honor for me to be able to assemble this cast of musicians with Ron Carter and Wallace Roney and Mark Carey and these guys on the record. But I really wanted to lean this one really more towards jazz in its origin. There's a little bit of hint of the continent tossed in there too. But basically, yeah, the vocabulary and the narrative of jazz as African Americans.
This project, too, I mean, just listening to everything, I think you've come full circle on this. One being that you do understand the musical diaspora and your connection to Africa. That's very important. But two, just roots music, because you've come from jazz, you've come from rock, you've come from blues, you've done it all, hip hop. Where are you musically right now? Because your last project was very courageous, but this one, you've, like I said, we've come back to full circle.
Well, right now, I'm in this particular position of really wanting to play jazz the way I feel it, the way I experience it. But also, I do have a foot in the continent in terms of my last 3 or 4 years of working with two very famous artists from Mali, Salif Keita and Oumou Sangari. And when I went to Mali, and I still go pretty frequently, although there's trouble now in the north, I had an opportunity to link up with the history of the blues. I was in the desert with the Takamba music, which is the desert blues, which is where Ali Fakatore comes from, which is where Lead Belly and Howlin' Wolf and all of that, that's that connection. So I had an opportunity to really go and study and research this music in terms of its tunings, its sound, its melodies. And it's very important for me, being a musician, even playing jazz, to have that narrative, to have that information, and be able to combine the history of the blues and jazz in West Africa with it getting to New Orleans and Chicago and New York, Detroit, Philly, and those other places where the cities also have an influence on the sound. But it's been very interesting for me to be here, but also to get this history. And I'm getting it from really important elders, staying in villages and really staying with families and studying with the elders, studying the old drum rhythms, which there are so many I can't even tell you about right now, so many doggone rhythms and different rhythms from different parts of Mali. But it's really important. When you listen to those patterns being played, you understand where cascaras come from. You understand where the salsa claves come from. You hear all of these things in the music, and it's so deep to be able to have that connection and be exposed to it. So I like to bring that experience to jazz and to my music. It's very important. It's the same language, just sort of researched.
Speaking of the CD, you, like we talked about earlier, you have some great luminaries on here. What's it like working with, because Mark and you guys, we're about the same age, but then you have to deal with Wallace, and then you're dealing with Mr. Carter. I have to call him Mr. Carter.
Not a bad idea. Not a bad idea.
the elder statesmen and the luminaries of this music. What is it that these guys are bringing to this CD, and what is it that you're actually, because you said that you were learning from the elders, what is it that they brought to this new CD?
Well, first of all, they brought the history of all of those amazing recordings both of those guys are on, especially Ron. Ron is, I consider to be one of the best musicians in the world on his instrument. And being a drummer, yes, there's some ego involved. I was interested in playing with Ron as a drummer to learn what it would feel like to play with Ron as a rhythm section player. But Ron is bringing so many things. It's difficult to even describe in terms of academically like a sound, but it's Ron Carter. It's the Ron that you know from Miles Davis Band. It's the Ron that you know from his classical background. It's the Ron that you know from his great solo records, Piccolo being my favorite. It's that sound and that knowledge that he has. And also, as a drummer, you think about all the drummers Ron's played with. Tony and Cabo. I mean, just the range of guys, session guys, up to jazz masters. So for me, he's bringing that sound, that knowledge, and that information. And we, especially guys like Mark and myself, were really open and receptive to any kind of criticism or any kind of vibe Ron was bringing to the music, because I'm not bringing Ron on a session as a leader in the sense of, okay, Ron, this is how this goes. I mean, it's a communication thing. Something that I think really is lacking in our community as musicians, as artists. There's not enough of that camaraderie between the generations, and that's how the music gets broken up. That's how younger people come out maybe a little bit more arrogant towards, well, if nobody's going to help me, I'm going to do this myself. And maybe some of the old guys might say, well, this cat can't swing or this cat can't play chord melody. We have to have those conversations. We have to be able to work with each other, or at least have conversation, whether it's over a steak or a beer or a coffee, whatever it is, so we don't blow up the bridge every generation, and then the next generation has to rebuild the bridge again. And I think it's very important that we have. I'll speak personally for me, the Rons and Wallaces and Buster Williams and Pharoah Sanders and Wayne Shorters, because they shouldn't die with that information. Things have to be passed along, not just a father to son, but a generation to generation. And it's very, very important to me that I'm interacting I'm having conversation with. If I can afford to hang out with artists like this, because I know what it's going to do for my psychic, what's going to do for my narrative, what it's going to do for my spirit, and it's going to be important for me to pass that on to the next cats. Otherwise, we lose the alphabet. We lose the way of making words and sentences and paragraphs and books, and it goes down the tube. So I think it's pertinent that artists like myself, that we have this conversation. We stay in touch with them. We shouldn't feel like Ron is too big to reach. I mean, you can always reach out. If no one reaches back, then that's that answer. But it's both ways. Those guys can reach and we can reach. And I want to exercise that right to be able to call Pharoah or to call Wayne, whether it's maybe, you know what, I'm working on this song, or, you know, I'm having a problem with this thing. Because that generation told me artists like Dizzy, especially Dizzy, I was told, was really a guy that his place was open to people to come and work on music and to work on styles and to go over tunes. He was kind of an open cat. That's what I was told. That you can go to Dizzy's place or you can sit down. And what better way for you to get information about music than to talk to Herbie or to Ron or to Buster Williams rather than have to go to a classroom. Because the knowledge is passed along differently in that kind of an environment. It's not really an academic exercise. It becomes knowledge, and it becomes spiritual knowledge.
Up in the boogie down Bronx at a period where music was evolving and changing again here in New York City. You brought up, just a second ago about a man that was pretty much one of the major influences in your life. Tell me about how you got into percussion and drums, and did you know the drums were going to be that calling for you?
No. I got into it because my older brother played. My older brother was a prodigy. His name was Will Calhoun. In those days in the Bronx, I would say early 70s, that was a period of real bands. You had bass, percussion, horns, keyboard, two guitars, background singers, lead singer. That was the days of Earth, Wind & Fire in Chicago and these kind of bands. And my brother was very open-minded, fortunately for me. He brought home all kind of music from the record store, so he played in salsa band, funk band, a rock band, and a blues or organ blues trio. Our house was the neighborhood rehearsal space. We grew up in a two-family house, and my mom decided to use the bottom part of the house for the neighborhood. So the local guy put his PA system in there, cats left their instruments over the house, and I was able to just go downstairs in my basement and hear my brother play. We're different. He would even invite other drummers over and go, "Yo, man, check this cat out. This cat's a lefty, or this cat is." this cat plays just straight up swing, and without realizing it, it was like education to watch all of these guys come in. So I didn't play drums at that time. I was really more into sports, and don't ask me how, but I got really hooked on motocrossing at that time. I was racing for a team, a semi-professional team, till I was about 15. And at 16, I traded the bike in to get a drum kit. But at 16 is when it kind of changed for me. Age 16 is when I decided, I quit all my sports and get a job. I pumped gas and changed oil and worked on transmissions and put all of that money away to buy my first drum kit. So it started, the records, the music was always in the house. The bop, the Caribbean music, the African music, the rock, the funk was always there. My brother's was there. He wasn't necessarily guiding me, but I had an opportunity to hear him. I went to his gigs. I teched for him. I liked hanging around with his friends because, he's 6, 7 years older than me. That's another generation. So I got to see some, when you're young, man, these cats are cool. These cats, this cat horn player's got his hat thing. He's got, I was around. I enjoyed the energy of the guys. So the drum calling came, I would say, probably around age 16. I decided I'm going to go and study this instrument now. I loved piano. I loved saxophone. I didn't play saxophone. I just loved the sound of it. But I took piano lessons most of my early childhood. And the percussion just sort of grabbed me. But my brother, obviously, and Steve Jordan living around the corner, being a huge fan of Steve, being a huge fan of Pumpkin. I mentioned to you before that was one of the pioneers of hip-hop. So the drum set was there. And the stick rudiment books were already there. So I decided to start picking it up little by little by little. And then when I decided I wanted to study seriously, I opened up a drum magazine and I found this school called Drummers Collective. And I called them, and my teacher was Horace Arnold. And Horace told me, just come to my house, man. You don't need to come, just come to the house and let's do private lessons. And through Horace, and we still are very tight to this day, I was able to be introduced to the Zildjian family, Max, Blakey, Alvin. I mean, the list goes on, and hang out with the guy. Like, I was 17 going backstage. Art Blakey's just played a show with the Messengers, and him and Horace are talking, or him and Max are talking, and I'm there, So it was amazing for me. Because I knew the music. I knew who those gentlemen were, without a doubt. So I was totally blown away at that experience. And then there was a new scene that was happening with Lenny White and Billy Cobham and Tony. Tony was always in the music, but Tony was doing more sort of rock and progressive things at that point. So that music was alive. So I was also very young and getting into that scene, as well as keeping my foot well suited in the tradition of the instrument. And that's basically really how it happened. Horace just kind of really opened my eyes to needing to teaching me how to phrase and read, brush technique, cymbal time. And we would go to gigs. Part of my lessons was he would call my mother and say, I'm taking them to the Vanguard tonight. Send them down on the train. I'm taking them to the Vanguard. I'll put them in the cab after the show, send them down. You watch Elvin, look at what he's doing. Look at how he's playing the brushes. Look at his mallet thing. Look at his control. Look at his dynamics. Check out Max. Look at his posture. Look at how effortlessly he plays his fast tempos. That was what, outside of my academic lessons, Horace took me to venues where I could watch Art Blakey's press roll up close rather than just hearing it on a record and watching that technique of art. So that was the beginning of it for me, and that's when I knew, I really want to do this. This is what I want to do. In my own way. I knew I wasn't going to become one of those guys, and I was interested in a lot of different things, as I always was, as a youth. But I knew I could play this music. I knew I loved it, and I wanted to put my color combination on the concept of playing jazz. Yeah.
You know, you talked about the rudiments. You basically got the rudiments at a very, very early age. What was the technicality of what you applied after you finished Berkeley? Because, you know, Berkeley has produced endless eons of jazz greats and musicians, but when you came out, there was another burgeoning scene coming out in New York City, and you and a lot of your cohorts, you guys were kind of just doing what you were supposed to do.
Very influenced by great drummers there, Billy Kilson and Gene Jackson, and so many other guys I can mention. Those two kind of being, they were a few years ahead of me, but being two of my favorite. Tommy Campbell came back to teach, but to answer, I mean, there's really, how do I answer that? You're right, that was kind of the idea, but Berkeley for me was an interesting experience. I was a recording and engineering major at Berkeley, so because as I mentioned to you before off camera, I didn't really want to go to Berkeley at the time. I felt like I live in New York, and I got into NYU, and Abdul Malik, the bass player that I used to play with, the Only Monk, was teaching there, and he was a friend of my mom, so I figured I'll just go to NYU, you know. Abdul Malik is there, I can study some jazz with him, but he even said, nah, man, you know, just check something else out if you can. So I wasn't planning on going up there, and I did, and I wanted to take another major due to the academics in my family. A lot of folks in my family have 2 or 3 degrees, and there I was talking about not going to school. So I figured, let me study something else. I can take the drums and the music and the lessons, let me take engineering, which I enjoyed anyway, the microphones and the physics of sound, and you know how sound works, how you can treat things, you know, glass versus carpet versus the cement, you know, building consoles. And I built my own studio in my house. So I loved it, but my real goal in that time was to study the drums and learn how to be the best that I could be at my instrument. That was really, you know, to be honest, the engineering was almost like a cover, covert, parental cover for me to say, yeah, I'm going to go study to be an engineer. They took heat off of me at the family dinners, you know, but in all reality, that's what I wanted to do, to study the instrument. So that was what I did at Berkeley. So when I got out immediately, my first gig was with Harry Belafonte. It was my first professional tour, was with Harry Belafonte. And I can't tell you in any words how profound and fantastic the experience of working with Harry, and more importantly, what Harry told me about the music business, about how important it is to take care of myself financially, how important it is to sign your own checks, how important it is to get your publishing sorted out. I mean, he gave me a real dossier on, you know, what to look out for and to be careful with. So Harry's gig was a blessing, but being around Mr. Belafonte, as I should call him, as you say, Mr. Carter, was totally priceless. You know, I was 19, I was totally green. I was playing in Vegas and playing, you know, 17-piece band, charts and the whole. It was a taking. And I wasn't really prepared for it. I can say that honestly. But he told me, it's okay, man, it's my music, it's my gig. If you can't cut the gig, I'll let you know. So he was giving me an opportunity to, so all I wanted to do was learn. I just wanted to learn. I was hanging out with the bass player, and I was bothering cats at dinner table. Yo, man, writing on a napkin. Yo, what's that line I didn't play properly? I was really just trying to learn. So Berkeley taught me that. Being around the great people who I was in school with taught me to study and research. And the older guys like Gene and Billy, you know, they pulled my coat. They said, Calhoun, you got to study with this dude. You got to take harmony with this guy. You know, you got to study. This guy over here really knows about, you know, arrangements. The arranging teacher, the best arranging teacher. They pulled my coat. The minute I arrived at Berkeley, I met them. They was brothers. They looked out for me. They're my brothers today. And those guys were very instrumental in me taking a direction at school, not wanting to really sound so much like anybody else, to really look for my own sound. You know, you know, school does that to you. There's a lot of guys up there just like Tony, just like Steve Gadd, or just like so-and-so. And I didn't want to do that. I was really trying to get the information and develop, you know, some kind of a concept for Will Calhoun. And thanks to those guys, they pushed me in the right direction. So when I got out of school and the Marcellus families taking off and Donald Harrison taking off, and there was a whole quote unquote young lion scene. Kevin Eubanks. These are guys. Some of Branford, I would say Branford and Kevin, especially, and Tommy Campbell, were three guys who came back to Boston to see what the next guys were doing. I remember being in the practice room and Kevin Eubanks walked in. We were frozen, like, that's Kevin Eubanks. We were playing his music, And he said, yeah, man, that's you guys are doing it. You're supposed to be in this room at this time working on these tunes. It's great. Branford came back and knocked on the door sometimes. What you working on? Let me hear something. What's going on? And he would tell us what's happening. He would tell us about what's going on business-wise, with the record company, with them touring, with things they were experiencing. In a sense, preparing us for what to look out for once we got out of school. So I have to honestly say those guys were also instrumental in giving us a little bit of pre-groundwork on how to carry yourself. What's your statement? What you gonna do? You gonna be a side man? Who you gonna play with? You gonna get out of here and go into that band? Well, you better get your act. You're not ready for that. Art Blakey doesn't put up with that kind of thing. You better get your act together if you really think about doing that. We needed to hear that. So those guys were very, very helpful with us getting our academic game together for getting back into New York City. I already knew because I'm from New York. I know how rough it was going to be for some cats, but it was great. It was great to see your colleagues and friends be successful, man. I mean, we watched Wynton Marsalis on the Grammys on my $20 black and white TV with the hanger sticking out of it. There were 20, 30 guys in my room. Nobody had a TV on my floor. We all watched that. That was profound for us to see him get that Grammy. We connected. We were like, oh, okay, we can do that. That's possible. We can look at that. He's right there. That's him. Watching him play jazz and watching him play classical music on the Grammys was deep for us. You had New Orleans cats right in my room. That knew the family better than we did. So that kind of thing for us is very, very powerful. Whatever you people want to say about musicians and artists, I don't really get into so much of the politics of people. I'm more into when you drop that stone in the water, what kind of wave do you produce? What's the size of it? How far is it going to reach people? How visible is it? For me, that's really all that matters. All the other stuff about, what this cat may feel or who thinks this, it's really not important, because you can look at any field, writers, filmmakers, composers, politicians, that all have little nitpickings about what somebody believes or where they go to church or who they're married to and so on. It's not even really important. What the person does. What Martin Luther King did stands taller than anything anybody could ever say about him. It's just a fact. So for me, the music is the same way, and I'm happy and proud that I could borrow from those experiences of watching the Wynton get his Grammy, and Ron tell you a couple of things about some music, or Belafonte really pulling my coat like, yo, he did it old school. Let me talk to you for a minute.
That'll do it again for another edition of the Pace Report, reporting live here at Zinc here in New York City as part of this year's 2013 APAP Music and Winter Conference here in New York City. I'd like to personally thank the legendary Will Calhoun for his time, as well as the staff and management at Zinc, as well as the festival organizers this year of this year's 2013 APAP Music and Winter Music Performance Conference here in New York City. As always, please visit my website, www.thepacereport.com, for my weekly column as well as my past segments. Until next time, remember, if it's in the groove, it'll make you move. Till next time, peace.